You'll recall that Imam al-Ghazali begins this book of Breaking the Two Desires with the rather startling statement that gluttony is kind of the basis of all of the other bad stuff that we do. And we explored Imam al-Ghazali's reasons for saying that. That's very different to the Western Christian approach, which is that the basic problem is sin, and particularly physical desire. Imam al-Ghazali's explanation for why we left paradise is that they wanted to eat from the tree. It was food. The traditional Christian interpretation is that it's to do with physical desire, and physical desire is a consequence of the fall. Adam and Eve were now mortal, therefore they had to reproduce. So sexuality is a sign of our fallen nature. And Origen, Clement of Alexandria, and many of the early church fathers say this specifically. Fallenness is nowhere more evident than in physical desire. Therefore, we need to overcome that as our most urgent task of spiritual purification. And whereas in Islam everything is وَكَانَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ قَوَامًا, you follow the middle path, in historic Christianity you abandon it altogether if you're serious about religion. There's the tradition of the celibate, priesthood, monks, nuns, the saints are celibate. Why is that? Because, first of all, they've overcome the key sign of being in the grip of original sin. Secondly, they are living, as they say, proleptically, that is to say, an earthly anticipation of the life of the blessed in paradise, which for Christianity is asexual. Islam does something really different, as we'll see from Imam al-Ghazali here. Much more humane. القول في الشهوة الفرج اعلم أن شهوة الوقاع سلطت على الإنسان بفائدتين. Know that the desire for sexual union has been given authority over humanity for two beneficial reasons. This is the main place in the Ihya where he discusses this. The actual mechanics of the process we don't need to deal with because that's in the Kitab al-Nikah. Here he's talking about the desire itself. So he says that two beneficial reasons why this desire has been given authority over human beings. إحداهما أن يدرك لذته فيقيس به لذات الآخرة. So when human beings know this pleasure, they will be able to intuit or analogize something of the pleasures of the next world. The Quran does this thing that's very unbiblical, strange in the monotheisms, which is to eroticize paradise. Whichever way you read those stories, and whether you follow the ulama who say this is symbolic, this is metaphorical, this is real, it's going to be exactly like that, or otherwise it's not really the point at all. The point is that eros is a dimension of salvation. And very often Christians have furrowed their brows at the Muslim paradise. One of the key Christian arguments against Islam is that it takes this thing that obviously is part of this fallen biological world and says it's in eternity as well. But Islam says, nope. This is something that is pure and good and beautiful, the way of the prophets and of the saints, and nothing that is pure and good and beautiful in this world can be absent in the next world. The next world is a place of consummation and fullness and perfection of the things that we experience only in an imperfect way in this world. Here we see some beauty, we see some goodness, we taste some good things. In the next world we see the archetype, the fullness of all of those things. And this is one of the big moral differences between Islam and historic Christianity. That we don't valorize celibacy, and never have done. We can return to that shortly, but let's move on to the second of his 2 points. الفائدة الثانية بقاء النسل ودوام الوجود. The second beneficial reason why Allah has imposed this desire upon humanity is that the species should be perpetuated, so that there should be children. But for this desire, well, not many people would have children. But it's powerful, and it needs to be powerful in order to encourage people to marry and to procreate. So these are the two beneficial reasons. So this sounds very different to his treatment of gluttony, where it's all really judgmental. And at the end, you follow the middle way. You don't eat too much, you don't eat too little. But he has this whole section on why it's good to be hungry, 10 reasons. He doesn't have anything like that in this section. And this is something that's very distinctive about Islamic ethics, and we need to be aware of it. Not just out of interest, but also because it's kind of important to us. Because a lot of relationships that aren't working terribly well at the moment, and this dimension is one reason why they're not working terribly well. So we have this actually very cheerful, optimistic view, and Islam is a religion of happiness and of optimism. Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam kana yuhibbul fa'la. He used to like optimism. He was always smiling, and he was in the world. He was married, he bought and sold, he fought, he ruled, he was absolutely part of the community. And this is tariq al-jalwa, being part of Anjuman, being part of society. This takes us back to the point that we started with. Generally, the way of Islam is to be part of things and to overcome temptation by being confronted by temptation. Not the way of the Church Fathers, who ran away from their own physical desires by going into the desert, miles from the nearest woman, but rather people who engage with life through getting married and finding a moderate way of existing. And it's unusual to find in Islamic history a wali, a saint of Allah, who didn't marry. You find ulama who didn't marry. Imam al-Nawawi, Imam ibn Taymiyyah, there are plenty of scholars in Islam who chose not to marry for various reasons. But amongst the awliya and the people of tariqah, it's very unusual. Imam al-Haddad says, وَاقْتَعِ الْحُجُبَ الْكَتِيفَ بِالسَّيْرِ عَنْهَا وَاقْتَعِ الْحُجُبَ اللَّطِيفَ بِالسَّيْرِ فِيهَا. Deal with the thick veils by going around them. Deal with the subtle veils by going through them. And what he means by this is the thick veils are things like sin, lying. You deal with the temptation to lie by not lying. But the thinner veils are things to do with our engagement with the world and the possible distractions which can be entailed by that, and we go through them. And this is the Abrahamic way. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam married and had children, and we remember him primarily because of the incredible richness of his progeny. 3 religions coming from him, and countless peoples, the Arabs, the Jews, others. SubhanAllah, nobody else has been a patriarch in that sense. So we have this this distinction. And this again is important to us, just as we mentioned yesterday, the way in which the normal human desire for food has been subverted by commercialization. People who make money out of people's desire to eat. And make a lot of money because it's a powerful desire, so that the moment you land in a US airport nowadays, you see people who seem to be 3 times as big as people anywhere else, great beach balls waddling around, a bucket of Coke, some industrial drink in one hand and some industrial food in the other, and they're munching and drinking as they make their way to the check-in counter. And that spectacle of the obese, even amongst children, is quite appalling, and it's happening in the Gulf countries and the Muslim world as well at the moment. Why is that happening? Because somebody's making a lot of money out of their appetites. Similarly, with this other thing, people make a lot of money out of exploiting people's desires. And this is one of the tragedies of our time. Half of TV is about it. The gigantic pornography industry is an example of that. The whole usage of sexual innuendo in advertising, in popular culture, in soap operas, in comedy, in everything, with every decade that goes by, there just seems to be more of it, more and more innuendo, more and more sexual content in everything. And the modern world is not very comfortable about that, particularly when it's things like sexualization of children's clothing, pre-teen children's TV programming, and that's more and more common. But nobody's quite sure where the boundary should be. No hikmah, no middle way, and therefore excess, ifrat. And that's the tragic condition that we're in. So people are so bombarded with these messages that it becomes an extreme activation of something that is designed to be just for certain times and certain places. Imam al-Ghazali in this book doesn't spend nearly as much time on sexual desire as he does on food. He's less concerned by it. He has a chapter on when we should marry and when we should not marry. If one really needs to, he said, then one must. If one is a student or setting out on a spiritual path, then it could be a distraction, because children and everything can be a distraction, and one can postpone it for a while. But generally, the way of Islam is the way of tazweej, of marriage. And then he has a section, the final section, بيان فضيلة من يخالف شهوة الفرج والعين, the merit of the one who goes against the desire for sex and for looking at what is sexually arousing. And this, again, an ancient topic, is important for us, because in the summer months in Western countries, perhaps they call it peak season because everybody's peaking. The way everybody's dressing is kind of hard. You have to adopt the Naqshbandi principle of nazar bar qadam, looking at your feet. If you're not to engage in haram with your eyes 100 times, by the time you get to work, it's hard. And again, people are uncomfortable with that, but they don't know where the hikmah is, they don't know where the balance is, so everybody's peaking. And the way to deal with that is to remember the prophetic way, and to remember that we are the religion which, on the one hand, is much more open than Christianity and most other religions about the symbiosis of sexuality and spiritual progress, exampled in the lives of the prophets. On the other hand, we're really strict and buttoned up about gender segregation, hijab, khalwa, all of those things. If we understand how we maintain those two things simultaneously, we'll have understood something important about Islamic vision for human happiness. There's two ways in which this shahwa can be dealt with by a religious civilization, given its power and the disastrous consequences which Imam al-Ghazali lists of it going wrong. The catastrophe of illegitimacy, of abandoned children, of irresponsible fathers, of the whole thing. Immense human misery. More human misery is caused by unregulated physical desire than by anything else. And people can see it in the lives of so many. It's not just Hollywood, it's just about everybody. Everybody's messing up because this impulse is so strong. Even somebody like Tiger Woods, overnight pulled down by it. John Major, the Prince of Wales, Bill Clinton. The ancient Greeks said that Eros is the most powerful of the gods. If you think you've defeated him one way, he'll get to you some other way. And so what we do as the Ummah of Islam is not to say, oh, this thing is from sin, and therefore we hide in a convent and avoid it. Instead, what we say is, this thing is a sign of paradise, and the beautiful way in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala perpetuates the species. What greater miracle is there in the world than a baby? And the process by which that miracle came about must be something that is beloved to him. The Ummah agrees on this. But because of the power of that, this is part of ihsan, part of beauty, and the celebration of beauty, that we create a society in which we have famously strict boundaries. I think no other major civilization has been as strict as Islam about the male-female engagement and interaction. And sometimes nowadays we're told that we need to be modern Muslims, and it doesn't matter too much if we're kind of a bit relaxed about gender interaction. Those people think that this is just an ancient tradition, like wearing a particular coloured kaftan or something, and we don't really need to bother. But these desires are as powerful today as ever before. In many cases more powerful because they're being constantly reinforced by media, pornography, songs, everything. We're kind of drowning in concupiscence these days. And we are probably weaker than ever before. So these rules about hijab and khalwa and not shaking hands and those other things should be treated with more respect now than in the past. And I don't mean by everybody immediately wearing niqab, but I mean treating it with respect and with the seriousness that it should be treated with, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designed this sharia for this age. And this age is known in his foreknowledge to be an age in which there is sexual contumacy, where the boundaries are loosened, where people don't know who their parents were, where there are single mothers, where there's people living outside wedlock, where there seem to be no rules any longer, where you have gay marriages where anything goes. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that this is the ummah that will confront those times, and therefore he gives us these strict rules, and so that we can be protected in some way from it. And often we mess up. You can be in hijab and still commit zina. It happens. You can be, mashallah, a great brother and still slip. But Allah in his mercy is hadda hadhihi al-hudud, has created these borderlines which Muslims intuitively know, and everybody perceives when there is a squeak of desire or inappropriateness. It's something that's deeply rooted in us. And the Muslim way is always not to let that become kind of amusing in the public square, the workplace, or the university, or the bar, where it's all kind of flirtation. We don't respect that at all, and we don't allow it even to begin. And anybody who allows it even to begin is regarded as a Muslim who has really lost the plot. Alhamdulillah, very many Muslims are still keeping to this, despite the kind of extravagant, extreme mania of the Taliban phenomenon. Still, the Ummah is aware of this. And the consequences are there in the statistics. Look at the website of the World Health Organization on the UNAIDS pages, and you will see a map of Africa, HIV transmission rates. The boundary between high and low rates of HIV transmission is within 20 miles the boundary between Islam and Christianity. The 10 countries in Africa which have the highest rates of HIV transmission are also the 10 countries with the highest percentage of Christians. And the 10 countries which have the lowest rates are also the 10 countries with the highest proportion of Muslims, and so on. The Christians haven't got this because it's an esoterism. Walad Darleen. The inwardness and outwardly, hey honey, you kiss on both cheeks and it's kind of fun and you have a drink together, but it's all, you love Christ, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't work too well. And millions of people are dying horribly as a result of this. So this is not just religious people being buttoned up and strict. This is about mercy. Everything in Sharia is about mercy, keeping us away from our huge weaknesses. So, and there are ways in which we need to factor this into our lives. Khalwa issues. The Muslim is a consultant, medic or whatever, and his secretary is with him in the same part of the building and the door is closed and he's there 8 hours, 10 hours a day with her. He has to find a way of not being in that situation, I'm afraid, because that is a haram situation. It's not about narrow-mindedness, we need to be modern and move with the times. It's a haram situation. And don't think that you're just above desire, because nobody is above it. The deepest rooted thing in the human condition. And the Catholic clergy is in a state of complete crisis as a result of khalwa issues. Recently, or not so recently, but a few years ago, I met a Jesuit priest who'd taken his shahada, and I asked him, you're a priest, you became Muslim. Why? He said, well, I was giving confession to this woman. She came regularly, and the inevitable happened. And I thought, I can't be a priest any longer. So he bounced out, he bounced into Islam. Happens all the time. So this is something everybody knows, and it's common sense. And people who come into Islam, and I think particularly women, immediately intuit it and appreciate being in a situation where they're not constantly kind of dressing to kill and being sized up, and that kind of fun but morally very dubious atmosphere of semi-flirtatiousness that exists in the Western sphere. So, alhamdulillah, many people who come to Islam find that this is not a strictness, but a kind of sanity in the middle of a world that is drowning in desire and doesn't have the wisdom, doesn't have the hudud, doesn't have the basic rules about how men and women should interact. And as a result, people are suffering. And usually when people are suffering and society breaks down, it's the women who suffer most. Usually when the man who's been looking at too many nice pictures of women and decides he doesn't like his wife any longer, cheats on her and splits up, it's the woman who suffers